Okay, good evening from the UK. It's 5 o'clock my time. God knows what time it is around the world. I know it's midday on the east coast of the US. It's what 9 o'clock in the morning on the west coast of the US. Um, well, uh, Yesterday, the Florida Panthers, the President's Trophy winners, lost in four straight in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs against their biggest rivals, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the defending two-time Stanley Cup champions. So the curse of the President's Trophy continues. So that's something of note. Um, Football, I've done my video now on Mark Noble and a look back at his career and some of the interesting stats and figures and how he never had a senior appearance for England. Again, is a head scratcher for me, but he had a very good youth England career and a very solid 18-year senior career from 2004 until literally Sunday. So he's only just retired. Tomorrow, obviously, we have the first ever Europa Conference League final between Roma and Feyenoord in Triana in Albania. That's going to be a very feisty encounter, I have no doubt, and it's going to be interesting to see how Roma set up versus Feyenoord with Mourinho. Can he repeat what he did for Man United against Ajax in his first season, get into a European final against a Dutch side? And the only team he's never won any silverware with in his first season is Spurs, so I think he wants to correct that slide. I would put Roma as favourites for that final. And of course, on Saturday, we have the Champions League final between Liverpool and Real Madrid. I'll do two preview videos for those two finals in due course after this live stream. Obviously, we've got the upcoming Women's Euros. That really looks like a mouth-watering competition. Rugby League World Cup, of course, and of course the Football World Cup in Qatar that we have discussed to death on this channel at the end of the year. Do I think Burnley will come back up? No, I don't think Burnley will come back up. I think their squad's going to be decimated in the summer. They have to service a sizable debt, and it's harder to service that in the Championship. I can see a lot of squad turnover. And there's some good players in that Burnley squad. As I said on the last live stream, I think what did for Burnley was their slow start and the COVID outbreak that they had. That oh god, it is now chucking down outside. We've had heavy rain on and off all day, but no, with Burnley, I think there's going to be a lot of players sold on. Out of the clubs that have gone down, I think Burnley are the weakest in a sense financially to cope and structurally to cope with relegation. Um, I think Norwich are the best run. I think Watford and Norwich are yo-yo clubs. Burnley, they're not set up for relegation. They have a fan base that isn't overly wealthy with disposable income. They operate on the smallest budget in the Premier League after Bournemouth's relegations. They operate on a shoestring, and with that leverage takeover, there's a big loan that needs to be serviced, and with reduced TV and ticket revenues in the Championship, and therefore also reduced merchandise sales for shirts and other memorabilia and merchandise, it's going to have a knock-on effect. I can see a massive turnover at the club. It's good. It could be financially catastrophic. I mean, if Everton had gone down as well, the situation would be even worse with their debts. I think out of Leeds, Everton, and Burnley, I think Leeds would have been the best suited for their off-field structures because they'd spent so long in the Championship that they're not fully adjusted to being a Premier League club at the moment. And yes, the parachute payments for a couple of seasons will assist Burnley for a short period, but it's a very uncertain future. Something in the Championship. Well, again, they're going to have to be very active in the transfer market, that's for sure. There are going to be a lot of players coming off contract. I say there will be players available, but it's going to be the Championship, such a notoriously difficult division to predict. I mean, so notoriously difficult to get out of if you slip into it. From as a Blackburn fan, I can attest to that. It's very, very difficult to get back. But it's also a difficult division if you're getting promoted to establish yourself in. Ask Peterborough fans that question, and Yeovil as well, because they went through several promotions and then they very quickly tumbled down the division. So I'm using several other clubs as examples in regards to the Sunderland and Burnley questions. I mean, look how long it took Leeds to get back to the Premier League. Burnley, yes, they've been relegated before, but their off-field structures were better set up before. Now, not so much. So you have to factor that in. Sunderland, they've had really poor off-field club management as well. They've been badly run off the field for a very, very long time. Now, yes, they're too big a club to be in the third tier of English football. Championship, we'll see how it plays out, but it's such a notoriously difficult division to predict. I mean, Derby were in the playoffs not that long ago, and now they're relegated. Barnsley were in the playoffs last year; they're now relegated. So it can be so notoriously difficult to say. Financially, the championship is a mess, absolute mess in the championship financially. Clubs are overextending themselves left, right, and centre, and it's a matter of time before more clubs end up in Derby County's position, or worse, Macclesfield or Bury's position. It is a matter of time before it becomes unsustainable. Yeah, I would love to see Wrexham back up in the Football League. To be fair, that would be interesting with Shrewsbury. To be fair, in the Football League, the League Cup games, for example. But no, it'd be brilliant to see Wrexham. I mean, look how long it's taken Wrexham to even be in consideration for promotion from the National League. I mean, yes, Ryan Reynolds' purchase of the club, I think, has assisted because he's got very deep pockets and he's quite a wealthy individual. And he's brought into the British sporting culture, which is difficult for North American owners to actually do that. Look, it would be fantastic if Wrexham could make it back up. It has been far too long that Wrexham have been outside of the top four divisions in the Football League. But that's another club that just was not well run off the field, and money became a problem, and then the team they put together wasn't very good, and they ended up out of the Football League. So it just shows how hard it can be to sustain a club in the Football League. Doesn't matter what level and in what league. And when you drop down a level, how hard it can be to get back to the level you were at before. But they are well funded, and if it doesn't happen this season, it will most likely happen next season. They definitely got the ownership and the financial stability now to take that next step. But Forest Green Rovers, I mean, they've managed to get to League One within a couple of seasons. I mean, how long can Forest Green Rovers, will they have enough to sustain themselves in League One? There's a lot of questions. And Forest Green Rovers have barely got a fan base. Their stadium's tiny. So how far can Forest Green Rovers go before that's their peak? In other sports news, before we go on, the CFL breakdown in the collective bargaining agreement discussions. I know it's Canadian Football League, so it's the mini version of the NFL. Obviously, doesn't have as big a global impact as the NFL, but there's been a breakdown in the collective bargaining agreement. An offer in principle was agreed, and now the talks have collapsed. So the CFL doesn't have a collective bargaining agreement. So how long, how long will the CFL discussions go on? I mean, could that be catastrophic for the CFL? I mean, that is a league with operating on fine financial margins, and that could be curtains for the CFL. That's big news, considering that in 2020 they didn't have a season, and 2 years later, they may not have a season again, and that could be curtains for the CFL financially. I know there's strong links with them merging with the XFL, but that could be curtains, unfortunately, for the CFL. So we'll have to have a look into the CFL and the situation in regards to their CBA not being ratified. Agreed in all but principle, and at the 11th hour, that's gone tits up. Much like Major League Baseball, but the difference being the league has no money. Yeah, Tranmere. I remember Tranmere, going down. And I did a video when Tranmere got promoted back to the Football League, and that was actually one of the more popular videos on the channel. All those years ago, back in I think 2018 when I did it, and you're still in the Football League, so it would be nice to see Tranmere even try and have a crack at the Premier League at some point. I got a solid fan base. I think it's a forgotten fan base, especially on Merseyside with Liverpool and Everton, and the media attention that they get. But Tranmere is a club with a solid history, solid fan base, and gets overlooked because of its bigger neighbours across the Mersey. And Liverpool have an opportunity on Saturday to win a cup treble. And the only other club that I can think of that's won a domestic and European club treble is Barcelona under Sir Bobby Robson. The year he got sacked for not winning La Liga. They're the only other club I can think of that's won a domestic and European club treble, and that's Barcelona under Sir Bobby Robson in the 90s. So the fact the quadruple was on until the weekend was ridiculous. The fact that they managed to close that points gap that Man City had, which I think was 11 or 12 points at one point, was ridiculous. Reminded me of the 94-95 Blackburn Man United title race, where it was a similar situation where we almost blew it and it went down to the last day of the season. So, the fact that they can still win a European and domestic cup treble is a ridiculous stat. And there are some very, very bitter fans on the fan groups that I'm on, the sports pages that I'm on Facebook and social media. There's some really bitter fans, and the media's obsession. When you had Thomas Tuchel saying the public and the media love Liverpool, I cannot stand that fan base. I don't like that club, even though I've been to Anfield and I've seen Liverpool play Sheffield Wednesday at Anfield back in '96. But I like players on their team. I like their manager. So they're a club I don't like, but I like things that the club does on the field. I do like Jurgen Klopp as a manager. I like his tactics. I like his style. I like his enthusiasm that he has. I like a lot of the players that they have. I just happen not to like the club and the fan base. Who knew? But that is a club with a global reach and a fantastic history. Whether we like them or not. No, I really hate Real Madrid even more. The reason why I have a little bit of a tolerance for Liverpool is my granddad and my dad. We're both lifelong Liverpool fans, and my granddad was actually born in Liverpool to a working class Irish family. So I do have connections with the city. I've got friends from Liverpool as well. I just don't like the club. I don't like the fan base. Partly because of my dad and my granddad. It used to wind them up that I'm a Blackburn fan and all that. That we won the Premier League before they did. But there was a sort of an in-family bit of rivalry. And my dad's father and my other granddad was a Burnley fan, so there was a lot of rivalry, I think, in our family, both sides. And but jokes aside, and a bit of niggle there, I do. I wouldn't say Real Madrid are bully boys to all the other Spanish teams. They just have financial assistance from the royal family and the government in the past, and they are their fan base is vile. The tactics they use off the field to sign players, they're kicking up a fuss over the Mbappe contract, which I find hilarious because they're equally as corrupt as PSG, as proven. And how could they even afford those wages considering the losses they've made and how they were signing up for the European Super League because they're bankrupt? Couldn't make this up. And some of the things Barcelona are doing as well to try and get out clauses of 800 million on a player. I mean, no one is ever going to reach those transfer heights ever again because of the new UEFA spending rules that these clubs are clearly going to breach anyway and not give two hoots about. Um, I'm not a fan of some of the Spanish clubs. Um, but I like to see Bilbao do well and Atletico Madrid. And people say to me, "What?" I like Diego Simeone. He's a guy who just doesn't give two hoots. Um, yeah, his tactics are nasty and brutal, but guess what? I'm more of a rugby league and ice hockey fan anyway, where fighting sort of is semi-tolerated, especially in ice hockey, where it's actually part of the game where you can actually knock 7 bells out of your opponent, sit down for 5 minutes, and then after the game go for a beer. It's just, I think I'm not rooting for Madrid. I'm actually a neutral on Saturday. The game I'm looking forward to more though is the Roma final game because Dutch football is all about total football or a variation on a 4-3-3 formation, and Mourinho is sort of like a back three with two wing backs, um, and a more defensively minded. So it's ultimate pressing attack versus solidified defence. So that's going to be really interesting. Now, FS actually is a sponsor, and that's actually a Belgian beer. FS. It's just very popular in Turkey. Just a little tidbit on that one. Um, all these clubs have extremely dodgy lawyers. Yes, I know. Who'll get them out of anything? I never respect a lawyer. Well, look, some of the fact that Real Madrid and the La Liga president are kicking off about the Mbappe contract is ridiculous because look, we know PSG have been investigated for financial fair play breaches, and they can't win the Champions League. Man City are being investigated for dodgy sponsorship deals, circumventing sponsorship rules. They can't win the Champions League. Which I think, well, Guardiola, he's won a lot of silverware. He's always inherited a winning team from the previous manager. And the way that Man City went about replacing Pellegrini with Guardiola, and they undermined him with like 7 months of the season left, saying, here's your replacement, by the way. I felt was unfair on Manuel Pellegrini. And that season was the furthest Man City had been in the Champions League up to that point to a semi-final under Pellegrini. I felt the way they dealt with Pellegrini was a bit crap, to be honest. I think Manuel Pellegrini was far more likable than Pep Guardiola. Fraudiola, sorry, sorry, Fraudiola. Honestly, he couldn't do it at Bayern and he couldn't do it at Man City with the players he's got winning the Champions League, but he could do it at Barcelona. Um, he hasn't developed the youth enough for me, which is where I think Klopp has the advantage. And in his first season, Man City actually got worse under him when he took over Pellegrini. They finished 8th. So while they're very good in the league as a domestic league team, they're not great. I think he might have retired. I think he went back to Spain, but he's a Chilean, so I think he might have. He was in his 60s. He was getting on a bit, so I think he might have decided, you know what, I've had a good managerial career. I'm going to put my feet up. I think he was at Villarreal again. I think for a period of Malaga or someone like. He went back to Spain. I'll have to have a look, see what he's doing, but I think he retired eventually. Which I wouldn't blame him. Solid manager, very well respected within the game, and he got his silverware with Man City, and then was shafted by them basically. The Real Madrid basketball team is very physical. They have a 7'3" player from Cape Verde called Edi Tavares. He bullies the opposition. He makes their players look small. If anyone, I mean that's Devon Toner, I believe, is the tallest rugby union player at professional international level, and he's 6'10", pushing 6'11". So that is ridiculous. No, that is absolutely like genetically modified ridiculous. But I'm not a basketball fan. I've made no secret of that. I have every respect for basketball players. Obviously, you've got to be a supremely fit athlete um, to play the sport. It's just not a sport that interests me or entices me in any way. Although I have to do some videos, I think, on the history of the NBA and look at top championship titles and stuff. Yeah, yeah. Great Britain losing the they were leading 2-0 to Austria and lose 5-3. If you're leading 2-0, you shouldn't be losing a game at that level against any opposition. And the US only beat us 3-0, and it took two lucky goals to really break our resistance. So I think it's time for a coaching change with GB. I think it's time, you know. Um, I mean, look, the Norway game we should have won, and the Austria game we should have won. So we only got ourselves to blame. They can't say, "Oh, we didn't have Liam Kirk" as an excuse. Although he is our best player, and he is obviously out with a knee injury, and the World Championships have come a month too soon. Um, but losing games from winning positions in any sport, team sport, is something that um, it's just unforgivable at professional, international, club level. If, if it becomes a regular thing, that's just no. I don't. Well, the fact that I mean, the US team that was put out in the World Championships had a lot of junior players who play in the AHL and the European leagues. Most of the best US players are still in the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Canadians lost. Who did the Canadians lose to? The Canadians had a shock defeat, I think, to Denmark the other day. So there's been some upsets, and we had an opportunity to win two of our group games. And I think we're too good for the level below. But I do think if you're throwing away games from winning positions and you're leaving things where you've got to try and do a comeback, uh, it's not good enough. And that is on the players. I wouldn't say we can't compete. We've proven in the previous, couple of years that we can. Yes, we're missing key players. Look, we had the top goal scorer last year in the competition in Liam Kirk, and he's out with a knee injury. So, yeah, that does have an impact when your best player and one of the best players in the last 12 months at international level in that tournament is missing. It does have an impact, but these are professional players. I think it's time for maybe a different coach. I think when this is what happens with a lot of international teams. Yes, they only come together once or twice a year into camp in whatever sport. But when you've got a coach who's been there for too long, you sometimes get a little bit complacent, and you need that new voice in the room. And it depends what you classify as too long. Um, and so and how often do you bring new players into your squad? And I think, especially when it comes to international level, it's like how often do you get new players into a squad? How often do you give debutants their first competitive appearance or friendly competitive appearance? And that's going to be crucial. I think, yeah, it is going to be crucial at the World Cup in Qatar. There's two uncapped players in the squad for the upcoming Nations League games, which I will not be watching because it's on Channel 4, and Channel 4's sports coverage is shit. No, I'm just being honest. Um, um, would it be funny if English teams had like basketball teams like the Spanish, German, Greek football teams? Imagine Arsenal Basketball Club. They have more than just. I mean, in Finland and Sweden, they have bandy, basketball, roller hockey, ice hockey, football. It's a European dynamic, the multi-sports club. But yeah, Real Madrid are focused on two sports. Barcelona are focused on six. It's what the members want. Um, it's the same with like boarding schools and fee-paying schools. A lot of them have now recently, branched out into the girls playing rugby union or rugby league, depending if you're in the north or south of the UK. Whereas 5, 10 years ago, the girls didn't have a rugby union team post the age of 11 where you could have mixed teams. Um, right, football, indoor roller hockey, basketball, tennis, cycling, and swimming. I think maybe pelota because they're a Catalan, which is similar to higher life, but that might be Bilbao. Probably got that wrong. I wouldn't be able to name all of them, but because they're Catalan, I'm going pelota might be one of their sports. I know that some of these clubs have cycling, so basketball, football, roller hockey is very popular in Spain. Indoor roller hockey, and they have a professional league. The Iberian is also very popular in Portugal as well. I would say cycling. I would say, yep. A lot of these clubs have swimming teams or swimming memberships. Um, I'm generally, I think it's football, basketball, roller hockey, futsal, handball, and esports. Esports not a sport. That's a misnomer. It's just nerds who aren't physically fit enough to play actual sports, who sit on computers and games consoles, drinking copious amounts of this stuff, probably with some other stimulants in their system, and they've probably never seen a girl naked other than on a website called Something Hub. No, I don't think esports does count. It's that I have to do a video on esports and professional sports and the merging between the two. Um, it's becoming a cash cow for professional sports teams to have like a working partnership with an esports team or esports or professional video gamers. It's going to be the next cash cow, like similar to what like the NFL taking games to London and Major League Baseball now getting on that bandwagon and discussions within the NRL about taking regular season high profile, like maybe Magic Round on the road or maybe games to the US. It's going to become a cash cow, and with clubs like Barcelona basically bankrupt. Oh, he gets a ban for life, but does he get a custodial? That's the interesting thing because the guy who attacked Billy Sharp got 28 weeks. Yeah, great, he gets a life ban. That doesn't mean he's not, going to commit another offence of a violent nature, which could result in something far worse than just punching a football goalkeeper. I mean, the situation with these pitch invasions, be it small individuals or small groups or whole stadiums charging on the pitch, is getting a bit ridiculous. I know it's been going on for 40, 50 years. Most of it is generally in celebration, but I'm going to say in the last 5, 10 years, especially with the rise of social media, there is a violent element to it. And of course, we've had pitch invasions in regards to hooligan natures where they're actually just attempting to attack the other opposition fans or the police in the past. But what we've seen in the last, I'm going to say 2 months, because there's been isolated incidents like the FA Cup and in league games, is just getting ridiculous. There will be some kind of community banning order. There will be a court injunction that if he's in breach of or found, trust me, there are ways. I've got friends who work in the security industry. There are ways. If he's in breach of that civil court order, which it will be, it becomes a criminal offence, and then it becomes a whole lot more serious. But also, he can appeal his life ban to get his ban reduced with mitigating circumstance. Highly unlikely that's going to happen, but my cousin's had a banning order from football. He managed to breach it piece of piss at the time. It led to a more serious load of punishment coming his way, and it actually nearly impacted his joining of the RAF. So um, it does have knock-on impacts. Now, they might have they might have other sports, but well, this is because these community sports clubs have members who vote for club presidents and the club board. Same with the NRL and AFL clubs in Australia. Um, if there is an interest there, I know some of the Spanish clubs have rugby union teams and rugby league teams, which represent their clubs. Um, and if there is an interest from the the members, the fan members, they will put that to a vote of their board, and I think two-thirds majority have to vote in favour or vote against for the motion to pass or be blocked. So let's say Barcelona, they can't afford with their losses right now. Let's say they decide to scale back their handball, for example. They would have to go to a vote. And I think it's two-thirds majority for the vote to carry. And the club president might have a veto on certain things. But basically, if there is the interest there, the members will put it to a ballot. And it could be on the next when they have the presidential elections on their manifesto saying we're going to expand to 10 sports that will be representing in various competitions. We might reduce to 5 for this presidential term for financial reasons. We will make cutbacks. It's just a different sporting culture. A lot of it came out of socialist movements, where it's all levels of society, all socio-economic levels of society, from the lowest to the low working. If you could afford your membership, um, you were accepted into the community club. Um, but it's like any members club. If you can afford the membership, you are welcome. If you can't, there you go. There are discussions this year of merging cricket into football clubs, but it got turned down because it didn't. Well, at some point, economically, and I will say this, I think rugby league and rugby union are going to have dual code clubs. Um, I think that will at some point happen. Obviously, Wasps do have their netball franchise, which is highly successful and has the financial backing of the club. And Wasps are pretty unique, as in they now own the former Ricoh. They now own their own stadium, the Coventry Building Society Arena, or whatever it's called now, basically the Coventry City Stadium. So much like Harlequins, they don't have to ground share with anyone. So I think it's the same with Saracens. I think Saracens own Allianz Park as well. So there's a couple of rugby union sides that now actually own their own facilities, which is pretty unique, ironically, in a lot of professional sports, is that the teams don't actually own their own real estate. They have to either lease it back to themselves via a holding company, or they have to ground share with another sport or sports. And that's led to a lot of problems over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic and games being cancelled and not played, and no fans in attendance and lost revenue because they've still got to pay the stadium lease, regardless of if games are played or not. They are the two. Again, I'm surprised Mark Noble hasn't been called up, even though he's about to retire, just for a farewell. You get a couple of games in the England squad, because looking at his youth career, he had 47 games between the under-16s and the under-21s. That's all age levels, between 2002 and 2009. 47 games, scoring 3 goals. And for a fair bit of that, because he then made his senior debut in 2004, he was eligible for the England side very, very early on. But of course, West Ham, at various points in Mark Noble's career, weren't a Premier League club. But I'm surprised he never got a call up. Really surprised Mark Noble. He would have been brilliant with the energy levels he brings and the box-to-box mentality that he has. He would have been brilliant for an England side. It's good to see that we are getting some of the other players, a bit of extra depth. Um, um, that it is good to see that England are now exploring some of their depth options. But for Jared Bowen, in his case, I don't know enough about James Justin. I haven't seen enough of his games and enough of his play. But Jared Bowen, yeah, England cannot play the way that England end up playing under Southgate. There needs to be pace on the ball. He's a very nippy, low centre of gravity type forward. He's a sniper around the box, and he can shoot from distance as well. But the games I've seen of Jared Bowen, he's very dangerous in and around the 18-yard box and the 6-yard box. He needs to move it at pace. He'll pick up scraps. He'll run in behind. He'll make runs off the ball. Um, and I don't understand Southgate's obsession with taking like half a squad of right and left backs. It's ridiculous. I think we've got depth in that position somehow. But I think we're still too midfield light. Um, look again. This is Southgate. He does do favouritism. How Pickford, with some of his performances this season, has got in the squad I have no idea. Um, that there are some players who are stealing a living at international level in that squad. And there's some players who should be in that squad that have basically said to Southgate, who are a bit older, I retire from international football or I refuse to be even considered for an England position while he's manager. So some really decent players who are solid depth players, or Jamie Vardy's case, still banging the goals in at his age. Admittedly, not as many, but his role is he's still a nightmare for defenders. He'll create space for other players by being a nightmare for defenders. They've basically said we're no longer interested in the England setup because of Gareth Southgate. There's your problem. And unfortunately, that win against Albania in qualifying, for example, where we win 5-0, we win the game by half time, then don't play an intense next second 45 minutes, just stop playing. We cannot put a 90-minute performance together, hence the Euros final, which we lost from a winning position. Milton Keynes, oh God, the land of the land of the left turn and the one-way system. Oh, Milton Keynes. Oh, but not good, but not somewhere like historic like Guildford. Milton Keynes. Does that mean MK Dons will be now called Milton Keynes City or something? Oh dear. Um, Milton Keynes. Oh God. They are scraping the barrel now for urban areas, aren't they? There's some much nicer places that could be given city status. Milton Keynes, though, just a dreary, bloody industrial state new town with loads of turn left. When you want to go right, you have to take like 8 left turns to go right. The land of the dual carriageway and the left hand turn. Fucking insect bite. Yeah, I mean Reading got rejected, but Reading is Bangor. That's in Wales. It's Wales on the north coast. Bangor, horrible place. It's near Rhyl. Uh, it's near Llandudno and Rhyl, North Wales, and Caerphilly. It's not too far from Anglesey. Oh, it's near Flintshire. There you go. I know my geography. Sad that. I don't know how we got into geography and bloody city states and politics, administrative. Oh no, Bangor in Northern Ireland. Oh, if it was Bangor, Wales, I would be asking questions why that's got city status because that's just full of heroin. Uh, like most cities are. Oh, Bangor, Northern Ireland, that's all right. That's to keep the Celts happy because they've all voted for Sinn Féin, which is not a good sign. They're all anti-Tory at the moment, so that's to keep them happy. But it's the Queen's Jubilee year, isn't it? So they do these things when the Queen has special. Um, well, yeah, look, we talked about Wrexham earlier, and if they get promotion, can they make a success of it? I think they've got the financial backing, as I say, to give League Two a big crack, and it's been a long time since Wrexham were in the Football League. But Wrexham getting city status. I don't know. I mean, look, a whole host of metropolitan boroughs and towns and urban areas have been given city status because it's the Queen's Jubilee year. And then when Prince Charles or Prince William, depending on who follows, Elizabeth II, gets inherits the throne, there'll be more urban areas um, attaining city status. It's what they do. It's sort of like a gift from the establishment to the people. Still got low energy drink. No, I mean, yeah, Wrexham. Wrexham City. I just prefer Wrexham. Wrexham City doesn't have that ring to it like Leyton Orient does, or um, Newport Gwent Dragons has a ring to it. There's certain team names that have a good ring to them, but if you add Wrexham City, it just doesn't sound right. It's like AFC Bournemouth. Sounds right, but if you're going Athletic Football Club Bournemouth, it doesn't. No, I'm pretty content with just Wrexham. Now, the Chelsea takeover deal hasn't been completed yet. They're running out of time. They have until the 31st of May. They are running out of time. They got a week or something. Doncaster, Douglas, Dunfermline, Stanley, and Colchester. Or God, there are some places on there that just yes, but Bolton just Bolton. What's Bolton famous for? What is Bolton famous for other than its football team? Not a lot. What is Bolton famous for? There's something Bolton is actually famous for, and I'm actually trying to think what it is now. My brain is actually. I'm scratching my brain out there. Bolton is actually famous for something. Really going to annoy me, but we'll get to that in due course. I don't know how we got onto places getting city status. I mean, that's just weird. Before I forget, Paul Ince has been confirmed as the permanent Reading manager. That was announced, I think, towards the end of last week. That he's going to be permanent manager for this coming season, which is uh, fair play to him. He kept them in the championship. Yes, they had that points deduction, which is obviously a problem. But getting that announced, I think, is important for Reading going forward with their off-field issues that they've had. And with the players they've got, they shouldn't be battling relegation. They should be fighting for promotion. I forgot that Paul Ince is now been made permanent manager at Reading, another place that failed to get city status. There you go. Trying to think now. There's some other sports news. There's some other sports news, but yes, the Paul Ince one being made permanent Reading manager. That is quite important. Obviously, the Haaland transfer will be officially completed in a few days' time. As soon as the final whistle goes, the Champions League final. Basically, that's when the transfer window officially opens in Europe. So the Haaland deal. I'm surprised it actually, went for half the value that was anticipated. Dortmund were asking for about 100 million at one point, and they ended up settling on a fee far less. Yes, it loses ranking points on the ATP tour. ATP tour due to the ban on Russian and Belarusian players. I think the tennis governing body has misread the room there because every other international sporting governing body is upholding their ban for Russia indefinitely. And I think tennis has definitely misread the room. Similar with golf, really, they've misread the room there. And it's something to do with ranking points. It's still one of the four majors, obviously, but I do think they've misread the room, the ATP and the LTA as well. I think the tennis of the women's tour. Um, I think the Lawn Tennis Association, who govern the sport in the UK, have read the room following on from watching all the international sporting bodies with what they've done quite well. But the WTP or whatever it is, or WTA, or what the tennis governing body got it wrong, basically. I don't mind watching tennis. Obviously, the French Open's on now. I haven't watched any games, but the French Open tennis, Roland Garros is on now. But by the time I get in from work, I just do want to. I just want to vegetate. And it's a difficult one because when Wimbledon takes place, we've got basically every year there's an international football tournament, be it the women's or men's game, be it a World Cup or a Euros. So, and sometimes obviously a Confederations Cup as well, if things going well. But obviously with Qatar and COVID, that hasn't happened this time around. So I don't mind watching it. I've been watching tennis since I was about 5-6 years. I remember one year I was really ill and I couldn't go to school because I had chicken pox. So I've watched the Queen's Club, which is the tournament warm up tournament for Wimbledon for the men. I remember watching that, I think in '95 or '96. The year Pete Sampras didn't win it, when he was on his winning run on grass. He was Roger Federer before. Roger Federer was Roger Federer. Um, um, and no, Wimbledon. I like watching Roland Garros and I like watching Wimbledon. The two majors I don't like watching are the US and Australian Opens. I prefer watching Roland Garros and Wimbledon. Winning Wimbledon is one of the biggest achievements a tennis player can have in the doubles or singles, be it mixed doubles or singles, or doubles, normal doubles. Doesn't matter. It's one of the four big ones. It's so hard to win. Of course, the sport's been dominated on the men's side of things by a handful of players in the last 2 decades, which is frustrating, obviously, for others. There's three players who've won the majority of the available, tournaments, and there's another three or four who've won a handful each, who are that next level, of which Andy Murray's sort of stuck in between, and Stan Wawrinka are stuck in between that, the ones below and the ones above. Del Potro's retired. Marian Cilic is another one, who's sort of on the cusp. And of course, with Djokovic and Federer and Nadal nearing the end of their careers now, there is going to be that end of an era, and then it's just going to be open season. I think the next batch of talent coming through, because I think Andy Murray's not got long left, Federer's not got long left, and these are multiple, champions in a sense. Winning Wimbledon is like winning the FA Cup or Champions League for a player in football. The NRL Grand Final, or a Super League or Challenge Cup for a rugby league player. At club level, international level, it's like winning the World Cup in whatever sport you play. It's like winning the Stanley Cup in the NHL or the World Series in Major League Baseball. Very few people do it, and as it's an individual sport, apart from the doubles, both men's, women's doubles, and mixed doubles, you don't have a lot of teammates to celebrate that with. I think it's like the Augusta Masters, the US Open, and the Open, with the majors in the golf. I think it's the PGA Masters or whatever it is. The golf majors. These things, especially when you're in the Ryder Cup, very few players get to win the big tournaments. That I think the last 2 decades has obviously been dominated by Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and to a certain extent Murray. They've contested nearly all the finals. At least one of those four has been in a final at some point. Stan Wawrinka as well. I think he's won maybe the fifth. one of those five has been in a final for the last 20 years without fail. Um, and those are the top five in the world consistently over the last 20 years. That is how ridiculous it is. But they're the five best that came through roughly. That's that generation, and they're all near the end of their careers now. Del Potro came close to, and Cilic. Cilic is still pretty good, and I think can win more majors in time. Del Potro, knee injuries. Del Potro didn't have his knees, multiple knee replacements, so I think he wins more. If Murray didn't have his ankle and hip problems, he wins more. Um, Nadal, if he was better on other surfaces other than clay, and he has won on all four surfaces now, um, he would have won more. Djokovic is just a machine, and if Federer was better on other surfaces other than grass, because he's dominant on grass, but if Federer was better on clay and on the hard surfaces, he wins more. It is ridiculous. The women's side, apart from the Williams sisters, yeah, it's open season. But there's always been questions about Serena Williams and possible doping allegations. She whinges that she's more tested than anyone else. She wins more than anyone else. You're going to get tested more. So she pulls that one out every season, going, "You're either picking on me because of the colour of my skin, or I win all the time." It's because you're winning all the time. Is there benefits for young athletes to play both team and individual sports growing up, or should they be sticking to one? I wasn't very good at tennis. I enjoyed golf, mostly going on the driving range, to be fair. My putting wasn't good enough, but my approach play was brilliant. How about that? I I found golf stress relieving, not because I was only good at it, but I would go on the driving range and just leather the ball. Um, most of the sports I was best at was team sports. And but it all depends on the individual. There are those who are better as team players, and there are those who are better as individuals, as in the sense that in a team sport they still stand out. Um, but a lot of players who play team sports like playing the individual sports like golf and tennis as a recreational wind down in the off season or when they're not playing. So that's interesting. There's a lot of and they normally play golf and tennis with their teammates and coaches and agents and friends. It's really weird. Um, and some of them are very, very accomplished. And actually, I think one or two have actually. There are a few individuals who participated in multiple sports. Let's just say that. I think there was one who did cycling and then transferred to rowing. Um, and cycling can be a team or an individual sport depending on the format. If we're talking about like the Tour de France or the professional cycling outside the Olympics, if we're talking about the road race, if we're talking about the velodrome, team time trial, individual time trial. Cycling is a sport that has both. Obviously, golf, Ryder Cup, individual tournaments, match plays. Um, I think it varies on the individual, and I think it varies on the sports you're participating in because some of the individual sports are good workouts and good to hone certain skills for the team sports. Um, and a lot of rugby players, both codes, ice hockey players, football, what you call soccer players, they like playing golf. And in these sports, you've got goal kicking, rugby, and football or soccer, foot control and eye foot coordination. In golf, you've got to have hand eye coordination. So you've got to have that aim and that momentum and that technique in how you position your body. So golf, ironically, is a very good one for some of the team sports, um, and it's very noticeable that a lot of ice hockey, rugby, and rugby league and football soccer players like to go on the golf course in their downtime. Um, so that does have that crossover, but generally, I think it does honestly depend on the individual and how an individual develops their skill set. Um, because in team sports, you've got to be a team player. You cannot be an individual because if you're one of those individual players who's brilliant, you can bring others into play when you're doing really well. When you're doing really badly, you become a passenger. Mesut Ozil comes to mind in that sense. Paul Pogba comes to mind in that sense. When they're doing brilliantly, that it has a positive impact on the team. When they're not doing so well, it has a negative impact on the team they're playing in because they become a passenger. So you've got to be a bit careful in certain instances in that regard. But that's a good question, though. Is there benefits for young athletes to play both team and individual? It depends on the individual in question, and it depends what team sports you're actually playing and what individual sports are available to that person, that young person, developing their skill set and what interest there is. And some of the individual sports are actually also team sports as well. When you've got things like the Davis Cup, Ryder Cup in tennis and golf, that's actually very, very important because even though you're doing your individual event, you're part of a wider team. So it does have some crossover. My school, we did football, rugby, field hockey, and basketball, and they were sort of optionals, and cricket. We did have tennis, we did have badminton. We had a sport called fives where you use a glove thing, similar to pelota highlight, where you're using your hand to knock a ball, which is basically it's hand-based squash. There you go. We had a squash program, so we even had lacrosse for the girls as well. So there were individual and team sports to play. Some were optional, some were compulsory. Um, so again, it depends. If we talk about any education, it does depend because the higher up you get in education, the more optional the sports become. You suddenly don't have to opt in for sport. You can choose to do so. I think after the age of 16, I think sport becomes optional in education. Um, well, it's an interesting one because when you're batting and pitching, you are individual against individual. And you're a baseball player, Dad, so I know that. Same with cricket when you're bowling and batting. In that particular period, yes, you've got all the fielders around you. But when you're bowling and you're actually going up the bowl at the opposition batsman, for a brief period, it's individual and individual. So sports like baseball and cricket, I think practicing an individual sport where you're, especially tennis, I think would be a good one, or badminton or squash, um, would probably be very good practice um, for helping you in regards for pitching and batting. Fielding is still got to do your thing, and there's got to be communication, and especially you've got multiple fielders going for the catch. But that pitching bowler, so cricket baseball analogy, and the batter, that's the two individuals at that particular moment. Once the batsman in cricket, for example, has leathered the ball, the opposition batsman or himself, depending on which direction the ball's gone. If the ball's gone behind, it's the non-striker who's calling run or don't run. That's when it becomes a team sport again because you've got to work with your teammate to get the run, um, and work out calls of stay, go, avoiding run outs, that kind of thing. Fielding as well, you'll have the bowler or the wicket keeper or the other fielder shout if they want the ball to do a run out, run the opposition batsman out in cricket. I think cricket's a sport you should try and watch a little bit of because you'll see similarities and differences with baseball. But I think that's the closest in a team sport you're gonna get to an individual action. But it's the same in a penalty shootout in ice hockey or association football, in an international or domestic cup competition when or in a league game in ice hockey when it is the attacker and the goal. When a rugby league game is tied or rugby union game is tied in a knockout game, um, and they failed in golden point to get the result, and they have in rugby league golden point, if you fail to get the points in golden point, it's a tie. But in a knockout game, so finals, so like similar to the Stanley Cup or Super Bowl, or when you go to overtime and you fail, it goes to penalty shots where you kick from I think 20 meters out, different angles, and it's the same with rugby union as well. Try and slot basically penalty kicks. In that regard, where you have different angles, different distances, and it again becomes now an individual goal kicker going for it. Um, I think that's where the team sports have that individual element to them. Um, Ironically, going to shootouts like that, especially in both kinds of rugby, is exceptionally rare. Football, it seems more common, but I think on the actual stats, because in football seasons you actually play more games than rugby because player welfare, and in ice hockey you play more games. In actual stats, the percentage of games that go to a penalty shootout are actually not as high as people think they are. Although I'll have to look into that with the NHL. Basically, in ice hockey, outside of I think the Olympics and the World Championships, I think the tie has now been taken out, and you have to go to penalty shots now. No, I don't think all fans are overly happy with that, but it doesn't overly change the league results points. It doesn't overly affect the league standings. A couple of teams might move around, but I would say rugby is the most team-focused sport. Um, yes and no. It honestly depends on certain aspects of the game because we've seen individual efforts carry a team, and I will tell you that now. If you watch the last couple of weeks of the NRL, there have been some individual moments which have swung the momentum of games. We've seen it in State of Origin, where individual moments have swung the momentum of games. We've seen it um, in rugby union in World Cups, Six Nations games, and rugby championship games, and Lions tours, where again individual efforts of individual players um, have won or lost games. But yeah, for like you know the majority of the 80 minutes of a match, yeah, I think every player is equally involved at some point in some way, be it defence or attack. But there are moments where a player's individual brilliance will stand out for a handful of seconds or even a period of time where they're literally having that much impact on a game that if they weren't playing, it would have a detrimental impact on their team. Um, Look at the Melbourne Storm for the last couple of weeks, the players they've had out. They've had two heavy defeats and you look at the stats and actually the players that are missing, it is having actually a knock on impact, on their results, and the stats don't lie. The stats do not lie, especially with Jerome Hughes, should I say, in the side and out the side. The win percentage with him in the side is over 84%. With him out the side, it drops to about 56%, which is still a ridiculous win percentage because that's higher than most coaches get in their coaching careers. Who keeps messaging me? Um, oh, what what is my mate Caleb doing? My mate Caleb is just being an absolute arse on Instagram. He's sending me loads of crap. But no, uh, the stats with Jerome Hughes and the Melbourne Storm, where his um, when he's not in the team, the win percentage drops by like 30 percentage points compared to when he is in the team. That is ridiculous. Um, and just, but basketball's again, you've got less players involved, and to a certain extent, ice hockey. Like some of the goals Conor McDavid has scored in the last couple of seasons, which are individualistic. Um, there is that moment where, yeah, look at Wayne Gretzky and what he could do to a game, or Mario Lemieux, or what there's a few, and Jaromir Jagr and Ovechkin, and other top like Sidney Crosby. There are moments where these players, you know, scored a goal or sometimes a couple of goals literally on their own with no assistance from their teammates. Paul Correa, Pavel Bure, ridiculous skill. But in the main, they need teammates to assist them with assists and other goals and the goaltender behind them to keep saving the puck. And so it's a little bit more difficult to say ice hockey. You know, an individual can have an impact over a whole season, but in a game. If you took Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr out, then the early '90s Penguins, they don't win those 2 Stanley Cups. That's that little bit extra you need to win. But in general speak, it's a pretty brutal sport. You've got to be pretty special to, like Mario Lemieux, to play through basically a broken back and cancer and a heart problem and shot knees. But Jaromir Jagr's still playing in his early 50s. You've got to be doing something right. Although my mullet's better than Jagr's there. Well, you say that, but then you look at the Chicago Bulls, the great Chicago Bulls side. That was a team of superstars. The Davis Cup isn't fun to watch with tennis. I've enjoyed moments of the Davis Cup in the past, and then there's been other moments where I just haven't enjoyed it. Very similar to the Ryder Cup in golf. There's been good moments and bad moments. That's what it is. Rugball, that's a different like futsal, I'm assuming, where it's sort of futsal indoor. Never heard of that one. Ultimate frisbee, I've heard of. That's kind of fun. There's some hybrid sports that have developed in recent years, where like futsal and rugby in this case, or ultimate frisbee, where these hybrid sports have evolved, which have come out of people just coming up with ideas, on the beach or down the park with their mates, and it's sort of become a sport. Pickleball. I think I have heard of pickleball actually. There are some really bizarre hybrid sports out there. You could obviously class the 100 as a hybrid, I think, because it's not quite cricket and it's not quite making any sense. I have heard of pickleball. Bandy's another one, and shinty's another one that's similar to ice hockey and lacrosse. They're similar to other sports, and they're actually older than ice hockey, but not as old as lacrosse. Lacrosse is possibly older, depending on archaeological sources. Pickleball is exploding in popularity here. Okay. Well, look, there's these new hybrid sports that are coming along. There's sports that evolve out of other sports. So bandy and shinty, that's where ice hockey comes from. Modern lacrosse comes from historical lacrosse, just with a ice hockey twist to it, roller hockey twist to it, with the indoor arenas and the goalie padding and the net sizes and various other bits and pieces. But in reality, it was a Native American sport played by the Iroquois Indians. I think some of these hybrid sports are a little bit ridiculous, if I'm being brutally honest. And well, not all of them will catch on. Some will catch on. Some will fade out of popularity. It's like real tennis is tennis, but it's also a mixture of squash and fives. There you go. And it was played by Henry Yates. If you go to Hampton Court Palace, you'll see a real tennis court. And I've played a bit of real tennis. It's really weird. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But you can see the origins of what modern tennis is. And it faded out of fashion. As modern tennis evolved, real tennis fades out of fashion. It's still played, however. It's like jai alai, which is similar to pelota, which is a Spanish Basque sport. Jai alai is played in Miami and in parts of Florida, and is a very niche sport. And in difference to pelota, it's played in an indoor arena, so you've got to put a little bit of squash in there But highlight, very interesting niche little sport. Um, Actually, quite a fun sport to watch is highlight. It's very, very popular in the Latin American community and the Spanish community in Miami and southern Florida. Um, it's a big highlight arena actually in Miami. Very famous from Miami Vice, and it was also in the Top Gear special back in the day in the background, which you'll notice from one of their first US special. But some of these hybrid sports and some of these niche sports become very popular for a little while, and then they don't quite catch on, or they go back from being very popular for a little while and becoming very niche again. And some sports decline in popularity, others increase in popularity, and this is where you've got things like the World Cups and World Championships coming along, and it's how you make it fun to watch in person, but also sell it to a TV audience and the TV executives and the internet generation. So live streaming, and this is where some sports that are niche in a country, like ice hockey in Australia, they post their games live on YouTube. Baseball in Australia has exploded in popularity and is now very, very, very popular. Got a high quality professional league. Same with basketball. So those are the American sports that have basically grown in popularity since the 40s, 50s. There's a lot of US personnel that regularly get based over in Australia, and it's caught on in Australia. And baseball and basketball now stupidly popular. They're better players. Go and play in the US, in the NBA, Major League Baseball. But the professional leagues there pay decently, and you can earn a decent wage. And the talent scouts will be looking from Major League Baseball and the NBA at undrafted players, bringing them over to the North American system. What is interesting though is netball is not very popular in the US, but it's very popular in Canada and in the Caribbean, like Jamaica. It's more popular in the Commonwealth nations. Now, there's several reasons for that. One, it's in the Commonwealth Games. Two, you've got the popularity of women's basketball. But netball hasn't caught on in the US like other sports have, which is interesting. It is very interesting. And I think what is also interesting about the US is now they've got a rugby union World Cup in the men's and women's in the 2030s. So in 2031, you've got the men's rugby union World Cup in the US, and in 2033, you've got the women's rugby union World Cup in the US. So that is interesting that they got a rugby union World Cup before a rugby league World Cup. And at some point, the international rugby league will have to look at the US and go, do you want a rugby league World Cup as well? Because there is growing momentum to try and grow the game in the US and Canada. Obviously, trying the Wolfpack experiment. Well, volleyball is very popular on the east and west coasts in Florida and California. Very, very popular beach volleyball. I think the US is interesting, and to a certain extent, Canada is because at grassroots level, outside of high school and the collegiate system, you don't really have those structured leagues where you have the lower divisions, for example, in sports. Ice hockey notwithstanding, and now with the NBA, you've got the minor league affiliate. Baseball was the only, apart from those two sports, baseball is the only sport where there is a proper, the minor leagues in baseball, the regional minor leagues in baseball, at a professional level where you can earn a decent living as a player. And I think association football, soccer, is starting to get that uh, the minor league structures in place, but there isn't that culture of having a tiered professional system. It's college or bust for a lot of players. I think that's where ice hockey and baseball seems to have a pretty solid minor league system at professional level where you can earn a decent living. Other sports just do not have those structures in place, and it is literally college or bust. And I think that's the weakness with the American system is you may not make the top level, or you may not make the top level straight away, but you can develop your skills at the lower levels, still earn a decent living, and develop your skills lower down, and then hit the top level. But you know, in the majority of sports, it is college or bust, unless it's golf. And even then, there's an NCAA golf program. So netball would be nice sport for girls in the US who want to play social. Yeah, I think I'm very surprised the US hasn't tried to develop their netball program better. I know they do play netball, but I am surprised that with the success the Australians, the Canadians, and even the Jamaicans have had in netball, and the American obsession with anything British, with the UK and the England teams. So the UK is internationally and outside the Commonwealth, and of course the Commonwealth is England. I am surprised the US hasn't attempted to grow their netball program. I don't know what it's like with the netball programs at NCAA in the collegiate system. I am very surprised by the lack of top level US netball players, and how unsuccessful they are in women's sports at netball, on the women's side of things, because America likes to be the world best at everything, and or claiming they're the best at everything. So I am very surprised by their lack of progression in netball. Um, they're going to have a rugby union World Cup, both men's and women's, before they're going to, before they win a world championships in netball. I think it would be positive, to grow that sport. But again, it's what do female athletes in the US want? Do they want to play netball? Is there an interest there to play netball? Is there that kind of willingness to grow the sport? It's all well and good saying you should have a netball team, or you should do this, or you should do that. How about we actually ask, Americans, especially women, do you want to play netball? Do you follow netball? Do you understand the rules? Do you enjoy playing? Do you want to play? And if their answer is no, we're not interested, that sums up, it's the same with a question I've been asked before is, why aren't there more in this country people of South Asian background playing football? Um, and if you were to go into the South Asian communities, it would be field hockey and cricket that they want to play. They support football, they just don't want to play it. And you've got to go, okay, you've got to actually ask communities, and ask the kids, do you want to play this sport? Are you interested? Do you enjoy playing this sport at school or at college or at university? And if they say no, there's your answer. But it there's a little bit of, survey questions, I think. But I am surprised the US hasn't invested more into a decent netball program. And But again, it's got to look at the NCAA system, and what they want to invest in, and do enough colleges, universities, should I say, want to form a netball league? Do enough colleges play netball at a decent enough standard for it to be worth their while? But they could, in theory, yes, they have the athletes for it, considering that the growth of women's basketball over the last 2 decades, and they are pretty solid at volleyball. They have enough athletes participating in both men's and women's volleyball, and enough female fans and enough female players to have that athletic base to do so. That is a very valid question. But do they want to play it at a high standard? You could ask that question of American women and girls, is like, do you like netball? Do you watch netball? Do you want to play netball? There are enough US students over here and expats over here who, at some point, if their kids have gone to school or they've gone to school here, would have probably come across netball on the sporting syllabus, depending on what school they went to, and if that was if there was enough interest for them to put together a netball team. Um, in regards to their rugby program, their women's rugby program is pretty solid, and their men's rugby program, okay, it's hit a bit of a snag, I think, in the last 4 year cycle. I wouldn't say it's grown massively. I mean, can you argue Major League Rugby has it been a success? I think it has. I think the league is growing, and more of them are picking up the sport, but it's got to compete against American football, um, and it it will get there. But the issue is Major League Rugby is not governed by the American Union, US Rugby. It's not governed by US Rugby. It's governed by Major League Rugby. It's like the MLS. It's not governed by US Soccer. That's the problem in governance. Is their leagues are a franchise-based model, so the governing body of the sport domestically doesn't have as much power or say over the domestic game at professional level. That is the problem. And Major League Rugby is played in two countries because you've got Canadian players and Canadian teams. So, or a Canadian team in Toronto, but I think they want to expand in Canada. So there's your issue: is you have a international league in a sense where Canadian and American unions aren't actually governing the league. Major League Rugby and is the governing body basically. Um, and when it and that is the issue. The same as Major League Soccer has got, which I think is hampering the US and has hampered the US and Canadian teams in the past. Is their federations or their football associations, if we're being proper about it, but their federations don't govern the league that the majority of their players play in because it's the franchise model, not the club model, and that is the issue that North American sports face when it comes to international participation with rugby league, rugby union, football, soccer for those North American and Australian viewers is their governing bodies don't actually govern their domestic leagues. It's the team owners basically, the league committees govern their leagues. They agree to allow their players to participate at international level, such as the Olympics, for example, the NHL and the Olympics, and the NBA and the Olympics. There's been times where they haven't allowed their players to go. And this year, they were meant to allow their players to go to Beijing, and then the COVID protocols and the COVID outbreaks they were dealing with meant they withdrew from the Olympics nearly at the 11th hour. But in the CBA agreement, they said they were going. So when it comes to the next Winter Olympics, look for the NHL players to be there. But the NHL and the NBA at times have not allowed their players to participate at the Olympics, World Championship Ice Hockey. If your team makes the second round, you ain't going to the World Championship. There's a cut-off point. So the leagues have a big say on whether they release their players for international duty, and that is a problem. That is a big problem with the Olympics and World Championships with ice hockey, and the NBA with the Olympics as well. And it's down to CBAs, and it's down to the board of governors meetings that they have saying, well, at this CBA, we're not going to let you go to this Olympics, but we'll give you a salary cap pay rise. Here you go. The players have made it very clear in both leagues that, especially the NHL, they want to go to the Olympics. And with the NBA becoming more international as well in recent decades, with a lot more European and Asian players and Australian players, they want to represent their country at the Olympics. Of course, the dream team in the early 90s, like the Chicago Bulls and all that. Um, and with the IOC changing the rules when it comes to football, soccer, um, ice hockey, and basketball, they are now allowing professional and rugby union as well with the sevens, allowing professional players to participate at the Olympics, whereas before the 80s and before, um, it was because of the Soviets basically being able to put out professional players in ice hockey that they and decided to change the rules on allowing um, players who were professional to participate in these sports because there was an unfair advantage. It was the Red Army or the Red Air Force basically were putting out a professional team in the ice hockey for every Olympics. But no, the especially the NBA and the NHL, yes, the collective bargaining agreements, and we've seen threats of player strikes over this, and very heated and tense negotiations with CBAs that have gone down to right to the wire before they're agreed upon. And the players were very, very disappointed when they didn't go to the South Korean Olympics. A collective bargaining agreement. So basically, a lot of sports have this, even with the PFA in the Premier League and the Football League. There will be negotiations that players will have with the league, and if they're not happy with something, they will vote in favour of strike action. So a CBA is a collective bargaining agreement. It normally happens in leagues with salary caps, or in the Major League Baseball's case, luxury taxes in regards to what is allowed to expenditure. And even with the PFA in English football, and then the various domestic leagues around Europe with their PFAs, when La Liga and Barcelona and Girona were going to basically say, we're going to take a game to the US, we're going to play a game in New York, and the Spanish FA and the Spanish Players Association went, we'll go on strike if you do. There are certain things. So when at the start of every season, a team will get an operating license, and this is what Chelsea and to a certain extent Derby County have got a problem with is they sign up to the league rules for each season. What we've seen with the salary cap breaches with Saracens and Leicester and Rugby Union. We've seen this obviously with the salary cap breaches in the NRL. There are all these. There's all sorts. And yes, there was, there are certain things when it comes to bits and pieces with a CBA is basically where the players discuss what they want. So there's issues that the players like likeness rights when it comes to video games or trading cards or shirts with your name on the back. So merchandise sales, salaries. The legal guy will imposing a salary cap or a spending cap, and that gets discussed. And eventually, they come to an agreement where they'll go, okay, we'll have the salary cap at this level, but we want to get so much revenue sharing from like what revenues the league makes, and various other bits. There's all sorts. Each CBA is different. Each league is different. But it's basically an agreement saying for the next year to however long a CBA agreement lasts, normally for the length of a TV deal, which is normally about 5 years. It's normally negotiated the year before a TV deal is up for negotiation, ironically, because it gives that labour stability. It gives that stability where they can sell the product to the TV, the TV companies, the media companies, because media companies like stability to invest. What is the worst individual performance you've seen on a football pitch? I would actually argue on a sports pitch, individual performance. Oh, God. It's going to be a difficult one. I've seen some bad ones. In what sense are we asking? Are we looking at worst? Is it for ill discipline, or is it just generally being absolutely terrible? I'm going to go for Paul Pogba, and I'm going to go for the 2018 or 2019 FA Cup final. I'm going to go Paul Pogba in the 2019 FA Cup final against Chelsea. It's the worst footballing one I've seen for a while, where he just was a passenger the entire time. That's one of the worst. Cool. It's a difficult one because I've seen some absolute shocking performances. It depends. If you're talking about ill discipline, then you've got to go for Adrian Morley. In I can't remember which test it was against Australia in which year, but he lasted precisely 3.5 seconds before getting sent off. There you go. How many strikes? Okay, the Major League Baseball, I've done a whole video on the history of labour unrest, and if you include this lockout, that would be 9. Major League Baseball, you've had 3 lockouts and 1 strike in the NHL. No, Karius, there's mitigating circumstances because he was actually concussed and knocked out in that game, and he played on with a concussion, and he shouldn't have. And Mignolet was on the bench, and he should have come on. I've done 2 videos on Loris Karius and that entire situation 4 years ago, and they're on the channel, and they still get views, by the way. There was mitigating circumstances that he was concussed, and he should have come off, and Mignolet should have come on. And what we now know with the protocols, Loris Karius is not the worst one. I think Rob Green is a pretty bad one in the World Cup in the World Cup in 2010. Robert Green in 2010 in the World Cup. The entire England team against Croatia in the qualifier for Euro 2008. The entire team. Just the entire team. The entire team against Germany in the 2010 World Cup as well. The 2010 World Cup, I think that was a shocking attempt by England in that tournament. Euro 92 for England was pretty poor. Yes, Mauro Bergamasco. Nick Malay and his the South African-born Italian coach did a little bit of an experiment because they didn't have a fit scrum half. So in the end, I think a fullback or a fly half ended up playing scrum half for him. That was unfortunate, but that wasn't his fault. He was told they'd obviously trained in the position all week, and in the build up to that game, and it just didn't work because you would think they would put a fly half or a fullback in that role, but they decided to go with a flanker because they had injuries. That it was a disaster, but it was an unfortunate experiment. That wasn't Bergamasco's fault. That's on the coach. That's a coaching fail, not a player fail. The player was told to do a role that he just physically couldn't do on skill set. He just couldn't do it. On the NFL and the NBA, I'd have to look at the labour unrest there. It's been a long time since the NBA and NFL had any kind of labour unrest, and I'll have to do histories videos on that and look at histories of lockouts and strikes with the NBA and NFL. It has happened, but Major League Baseball's had the most with 9 stoppages since 1973. Most recently over Christmas, New Year, and the NHL's had 4 labour stoppages, 1 strike, and 3 lockouts in my lifetime, but not for 9 years. So it's been nearly a decade since the NHL shut down. Other poor ones. There's been some other pretty shocking ones. I'm trying to think now. There's been some really bad ones. Some really poor performances by players. It's generally they are few and far between when it comes to league and union. But the Bergamasco, that wasn't his fault. That was on the coach putting him in a position that he shouldn't have been in. That's a coaching disaster. I would have to say, well, Harry Maguire, I think that's a confidence thing because when he's at Leicester and when he's at Hull, he's not that bad a player. Phil Jones has had some shocking ones as well. But Titus Bramble comes to mind as a player who had some horrific moments. Manuel Almunia has had a couple of shockers in goal. Dudek's had a couple of shockers in goal. And these are players who played in Champions League finals. Do you think English football should have a wage salary cap because we've seen clubs like Portsmouth, Macclesfield, Bury, Derby County, Oldham, Athletic? I think they should stop. It will stop clubs going bust. UEFA are bringing in new spending rules that are going to be more strictly enforced than financial fair play and the profit loss rule because they're not being strictly enough. They're not being strictly enforced, and there's too many loopholes where clubs can skirt round the rules that UEFA have got in place now for the top European leagues. And Alexander Serafin has said financial fair play doesn't work. There are too many loopholes, and it's too easily appealed where punishment's reduced to points deductions, fines, and it's just not worth pursuing. Derby County's case is different. That's down to the previous ownership and stadium issues. But the fact that Bury and Macclesfield have actually gone bust for different reasons. Macclesfield was partly due to COVID as well, and they managed to complete their season. Bury didn't even manage to start their following season. So I think a salary wage cap is coming. Looking at UEFA's proposals for new spending rules and financial rules, it is basically a spending cap, not quite a salary cap, not quite a transfer cap, but a mixture of the two. Look, leagues and clubs have been arguing for this at various levels of the European game, not just the English game, but the European game now for several seasons, and it's growing. And COVID sped up that argument. How long until? Hang on a second. It comes into force. Look, this time last year, 18 months ago, League One and League Two clubs said we want a salary cap. They basically said we want a salary cap. Unfortunately, the Championship clubs were like, yeah, but we're trying to get an emergency funding deal from the Premier League. Let's try and focus on that. And it's sort of gone on the back burner. But it needs to be a UEFA-wide system. It can't just be an English system or a Scottish system or a French system or German or Italian. It has to be UEFA-wide. And that's where Alexander Serafin and UEFA with their financial reforms and their financial rule reforms, and I do honestly stress this, and I do agree with this, are starting to gain traction. And they are proposals. They're very, very likely. They're going to get voted through. I think clubs have realised now that to avoid another European Super League, they need to be all profitable. And this is what's stupid: is if Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Tottenham, and Man United, and Liverpool, and all these European Super League clubs that signed up for it, ironically, if they actually spent less on transfers, developed more youth internally, and actually played a bit more hardball when it came to player wages, all the clubs, all the top clubs, if they were like, nah, you're not getting paid that much, mate. These players will be locked out of a job very quickly. Ironically, and what we're going to find is Mbappe's contract is going to age very badly in a couple of years. Mbappe's contract is going to look really bad for PSG in a couple of years. Ironically, these new rules that they're proposing come in after the Qatar World Cup. I think it's 2024 or 2023-24 season. So it'll be after the Qatar World Cup that these spending new replacement for financial fair play come into effect. Mbappe's contract is going to look really bad when PSG have to reduce their expenditure in line with the new rules. That's going to be a dead weight. Messi would have retired by that point, more likely than not, because he's been shocking this season, not been very effective at all. But Mbappe's new contract is going to be a dead weight around that club. It is going to seriously impact their ability to retain players and sign new players, because if they've got to have their wages at 70% of profits, so their expenditure eventually will have to be at 70% of their income, not the other way around. So the 135% rule is actually being reversed, basically. So instead of your losses not exceeding 135% of what your profits are or income, yes, the PFA will die on the hill, but I think the players have to be realistic, and they're going to have to go, we are paid more than enough. we're going to have to start taking a bit of a wage trim in the short to medium term. In the long term, they're going to be, ironically, I think their wages will be higher than they'll ever be. Look at the salary cap era in all those salary cap leagues. Players are getting paid more now than they ever have been before the salary caps were introduced. Let that sink in. NHL players are getting paid more than they ever have. Basically, baseball players, ironically, top end and now base salaries are the highest they've ever been with the new CBA. NFL, NBA, NRL, AFL. Before the salary cap and after the salary cap, the average wage is higher and the top salaries are now higher than what they ever have been in real and actual terms, including adding inflation. So the PFA have got to do their research at salary cap controlled leagues. And initially, in the first couple of seasons, salaries drop. You'll have a couple of grandfathered contracts, but in the first, I'd say 2 to 5 seasons, salaries go down a bit and then they skyrocket because the salary cap goes up every year on a scale and the wages go up every year on the scale. And eventually, they'll be higher than what they are now. So if the players are smart and the PFA are smart, they'll do their research into other leagues and other sports, and they will see that the players are getting paid more now than they ever have been before salary cap. So you imagine, I think UEFA will eventually tinker their spending rules into a salary cap and a transfer cap. I think eventually it will happen where no one club can just buy a league basically like PSG or Celtic and Rangers in Scotland or the big three in Spain, or in Liverpool Man City's case, the Premier League for the last 5 seasons, since Leicester basically. But then again, if you look at it, only 7 clubs in total have won the Premier League in 30 years, which is ironically very, very competitive. But 13 of those titles, so just under half of them, are Man United. Weird, that, isn't it? Man United have won 13 Premier League titles, but I think it's since 2013 they haven't won silverware or something. I don't know when they last won the Premier League, but it's been a while in Man United's case. But just under half the Premier League titles have gone to Man United, and there's by some distance as well. It's not even close. Only 7 teams have ever won the Premier League. 6 of those teams are currently in the Premier League. One's in the Championship. That good. Thank you. Little tidbit of knowledge there. That shows actually a quite competitive league. If you take Man United's titles out of it and distribute those 13 titles equally throughout the 6 previous winners plus a handful of other clubs, for example, who would have finished second. So Newcastle would have had a couple if that was the case. Liverpool would have had. So if you take Man United's titles completely out of it, and were to equally distribute them amongst the other winners, hypothetically, or the second place team, ironically, more clubs have won the Premier League. There you go. Tottenham, ironically. I wouldn't, not necessarily. It's just the Bundesliga in the last decade has been dominated by Bayern Munich. However, it's a more competitive league than you think, because the Bundesliga has been called the Bundesliga since the Second World War. So, in its current format, it's more competitive than you realise. The French league, the most dominant side who won the French league is at 10. So that's, I think, a joint with St Etienne and PSG. At the moment, have 10 titles each of the French top flight. And I think in St Etienne's case, 9 of them have been in the modern era. So that's really ironic that actually PSG have less top flight titles than Manchester United. There you go. And PSG are not as dominant as people think. Before the takeover, they'd only won 2 league titles. There you go. Honestly, before their Middle Eastern takeover, they only won the league twice. So yes, they have bought the league, but they're not as dominant as people realise. Okay, I was right. It was 2013. So yes, at one point, Manchester United had won more than half the Premier League titles at the point of Alex Ferguson's retirement. Ferguson's retirement, they won more than half of the Premier Leagues contested. At the moment, as it currently stands, they've won just under half the Premier League titles contested at 13. So that tells you something about how dominant Man United were between 1992 and 2013. In a 21-year period, they won it 13 times. And yes, it's been 9 years without a league title. They've won other silverware in that period, but it's been, what, 2 or 3 trophies since that last league title. How long until their next one? Who knows? Will Ten Hag be able to do what Alex Ferguson and turn things around? He has to be given time. Ironically, there's something Moyes and Solskjaer, Van Gaal, and Mourinho which were not given. 3 seasons is not enough time to fix the problems. A season and a half, 2 seasons is not enough time to fix the problems. 7 months is not enough time to fix the problems. That just shows how out of touch modern club owners are with the modern game. This is where Eddie Howe at Bournemouth for so long, for example, Sean Dyche obviously at Burnley for so long, but now it's Klopp and I think Klopp and Guardiola are the 2 longest serving managers currently at their clubs in the Premier League. I think Houston Hartle, I think, is the 3rd longest or something. Like, managers aren't given time anymore. Yes, Tuchel signed a contract extension. We do not know what the future holds for Tuchel at Chelsea. The new owners might go, yep, we'll stick. But looking at last time with Ranieri at Chelsea, for example, when Abramovich took over, he got rid of him. So time is not something managers get. So Klopp and Guardiola are unique, I think. They're the exception rather than the rule these days. I think it will take some time for Newcastle to do what Man City have now done. It took Man City, I think, 4 or 5 seasons to actually win their first silverware. And Liverpool, it took a long time for Klopp to suddenly get that team to where they are. It didn't happen overnight. I can't see Chelsea, Arsenal, or Tottenham closing the gap to those 2 at the moment. I think there's still some gap there, but Arsenal have proven in recent seasons they can still win the FA Cup and still make sure that City and Liverpool don't dominate all the domestic trophies. Chelsea have proven that Man City and Liverpool can't dominate all domestic trophies because they've won. Leicester have proven that Man City and Liverpool can't dominate all the domestic trophies. Unfortunately, all the domestic trophies have been won by 2 clubs this season. So, yes, that is a frustration. Palace gave it a go. They got to a semi-final. It wasn't to be. Had Palace beaten Chelsea in that semi-final, I think it would have been more difficult for Liverpool, ironically, to win the FA Cup because Patrick Vieira is a machine in that competition. You look, Southgate. Southgate is heavily criticised on this channel by many of the viewers and myself. While he is getting results, I will say that he is getting results. Unfortunately, some of his squad selections and his tactics leave a lot to be desired, considering the available talent we actually have and the style of play that they play for their clubs. The fact he keeps selecting Maguire, there's going to come a point where his England form will dip as well as his club form, and I think Maguire's on the way out of Man United anyway. Where he ends up, another thing. But yeah, it was great to see AC Milan, win the league for the first time in 11 years, and Zlatan Ibrahimovic has done it again. Last time he was there, they win the league. This time they win the league. Zlatan does it again. I've got to do a video on Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Yeah, we lost Hudson-Odoi to Nigeria. Nikita barely featured, but Hudson-Odoi to Nigeria is just... Well, this is not the first time we've lost Wilfried Zaha to Democratic Republic of Congo, although his parents were Congolese and he came here as a refugee, so you've got to bear that in mind. But yeah, we are losing players to other nations, either by parentage or by the fact they were born there. And yes, that is on Southgate. We've also lost other players who decided to refuse to play for the national side or retire earlier than they should have because of Southgate. And I'm hinting at Jamie Vardy in this one, who I still think could contribute at international level. Simply because of what he does off the ball. Not what he's not scoring as many goals, we know that. But what he does off the ball and how his movement and he was a nightmare in the FA Cup final last year, so he's still got it at his age. It's what Jamie Vardy does off the ball, not on the ball, that is very important and what I think England need up front. Jarrod Bowen is basically a young version of Jamie Vardy in his movement, what he does off the ball. He's very good in the box as well, and he adds pace and energy, which I think will complement Harry Kane going forward. James Justin, I haven't seen enough of him play to pass comment on his inclusion, but definitely with Jarrod Bowen, his call up is long overdue. Looking out how the energy and the energy levels he plays with, he's moving off the ball, and when he does get the ball, he'll just run at players. He'll pass and go. He's a younger Jamie Vardy, basically. He's very, very similar, and I can see him starting to knock the goals in quite a bit for West Ham and England. I'm surprised his inclusion's come this late. I'm surprised he wasn't called up in the previous 12 months. Again, it's on Southgate. But how had Euro 2020 taken place on time, COVID notwithstanding, and with how Jamie Vardy played last year for Leicester, admittedly not scoring many goals, but he was a nightmare when he came on in that FA Cup final. Had Euro 2020 been played on time, and even that it wasn't, Jamie Vardy not being part of Southgate's plans going forward and basically announcing his retirement early from international football, that is on Southgate. Southgate is putting players off wanting to play for this team, and when they're young and they're switching allegiance, and veteran players are switching off as well and retiring earlier than they should do. Yes, Zlatan celebrate it's Zlatan. He's going to celebrate how he celebrates, and he's going to be Zlatan about it. I'm going to have to do a video on Zlatan, the career of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, because I might even do a video tonight. I'm actually prepping tonight, do it for tomorrow in time for the Euro conference final, because I think Zlatan deserves a video all by himself. Realistic, how many years would it take for a League Two team to shoot up to the Premiership and win the league? Is it harder now than at the beginning of the Premiership? Well, Fulham, ironically, had 3 consecutive promotions to go from what is now League One to the Premiership, and then in that period of time, they made a European final. So it's doable. Fulham managed to do 3 consecutive promotions, and then within 9 years of their third promotion, was it 9 years or 8 years, they made a European final. In regards of winning a title, Leicester were in League One at one point and win a Premier League. It took more than a decade and a change of ownership. Wigan won an FA Cup but got relegated the same season, but they did it. I think they were in the non-league in the 70s, so they came to the Premier League by 2006. I think was their first Premier League season. So that took 30 years from non-league to Premier League status, and it took a further 9 years to win, or 8 seasons to win an FA Cup. Trying to think teams that have gone from the 4th tier to the Premier League. Blackburn, it took 13 years to go from the old Division 4, because we were on the verge of going out of the Football League in 1979, to Blackburn, it took 16 years to go from the old Division 4 in 1979 to win the Premier League in 1995. There you go. 15 years, I think, is the record of doing it, and that's with Blackburn Rovers. And that's when the Premier League was a bigger league at 22 teams. And that, yes, there you go. 15 years. 15 years. There you go. My team did it. Leicester, Fulham. It took 3 consecutive promotions and a European final, if that counts. Wigan, it took 3 and a bit. Was it 76? They entered the Football League. Wimbledon, I think, is another one. Wimbledon's another one. I wonder if he'll achieve his dream of 100% divert. Look, Southgate is a PC, politically correct yes man. He's not necessarily choosing players on actual ability and form at times. He's choosing on favouritism and because it suits the agenda the FA wants to be seen as. Because the FA has unfortunately and has failed in its diversity, and it has been raked across the coals when it deals with complaints about sexism, bullying, racism, assault allegations. It's seen as a unrepresentative organisation. There are some Marine AFC. That's a good one. They are well in the non-league. How long will it take for Frome Town to get the Premier League? We are asking some really, in theory, and I'm going to say this, in theory, the minimum it would take for a club to go from the National League to the Premier League, in theory, I am using this, would take a minimum of 5 seasons just to four consecutive promotions, basically, to go from National League to Premier League. Yeah. There you go. And that's in theory. In practice, I think Fulham have done the best with 3 consecutive promotions from what I think Fulham have done the best with the promotions in consecutive seasons, and they did make a European final within a decade of being within 9 years of making the Premier League. So that's 13, 14 years. Blackburn did it in 15, going from the bottom professional tier to winning the league. People forget, Blackburn were actually in the 4th division in 1979 and saved it to the last day of the season to actually avoid going out of the Football League. I know my history. That was the lowest point in Blackburn's history, was 1979, and we will not repeat that. So Blackburn, it took 15 or 16 years. I think it's 15 seasons, should I say? Sorry, 15 seasons to go from the 4th tier to winning the top flight. Fulham, I think it was again about 14 seasons to go from the 4th tier to making a European final. So there we go. No, I don't think it's Salford City. I don't know on this one. I generally don't know on this one because there are some big clubs currently sat in the National League. And Sunderland just got out of League One. That is a tough one. Very tough one. So, who else got promoted from League Two this season? I know it's Forest Green Rovers and someone else. At the moment, I don't see any League Two side making the Premier League anytime soon. Oldham got relegated. There you Oldham got relegated to the National League as finishing second bottom in the Football League this season, or second bottom in League Two. They are the first ex-Premier League club to go out of the Football League. There you go. Swindon Town went out of existence in the off-season. They're another ex-Premier League club with the worst ever Premier League defensive record, although they did play 2 extra games more than Norwich did, but Norwich's goal difference is not as bad. There we go. Norwich conceded, I think, 20 less goals than Swindon did in 2 less games. So, yeah, Exeter City and Bristol Rovers could do it. And Exeter City are well run. And Bristol Rovers, I mean, Bristol's a surprising city never to have Bristol City and Bristol Rovers in the top flight. There you go. That's a surprising city not to have a club in the top flight. I think Bristol as a city has potential. Bristol Rovers hate Bristol City, so that will spur them on. And Notts County maybe have been in the top flight before and were fans of the Football League. Salford City, because the owners, yes, but I don't see that happening. I just don't see them. I just don't see that. Bradford City, if they can turn things around on the pitch and off the field, they can get back to the Premier League. They shouldn't be as low as they are in the Football League system. Neither should Barnsley, actually, to be fair. Do I think a Devon or a Cornwall club could get Plymouth Argyle and Exeter City and Devon? In theory, can. They are professional Football League clubs. They've got great histories. And Exeter City are very well run, and Plymouth actually have a very good record right now with their for and against and how they played this season. Very good defensively, very stable club these days, not always historically in recent times. But Exeter City have got good finances, and they're expanding their little stadium. They're both professional clubs. Devon Cornwall, they can't even get a professional team in rugby union into the Premiership. So Cornwall is rugby country, rugby union country. I think Truro City is their best football club, highest ranked football club they've got. But Plymouth and Exeter City could give it a crack, I think, if they give it a go and are financially sound off the field. Like Exeter are financially sound off the field. They are well run, and they'll give it a crack in League One this season. I think it was Exeter City who went up to League One this season, following Forest Green. I think they're pretty well set to give it a crack in League One, and if they do reasonably well, Championship, here we come. Plymouth, they've got a very good record this season defensively. They're a sound unit with the squad they've got, and they have the opportunity to go up a level. And Swindon have been a Premier League club, and Swindon, I think, deserve to be at a higher level in the Football League pyramid as well with their history. But again, saying that, Bristol is a city that surprises me that either Bristol City or Bristol Rovers have been in the Premier League, so there we go, or even in the top division. So, and that's a city with the 2 clubs who hate each other. Torquay, I just can't quite. They've become a bit of a yo-yo club. I think historically Torquay are too good for the non-league, just not good enough for League Two. There you go. They just don't quite take that next. It's like Barnet. Historically, they just don't quite have enough. As Cumbria, Carlisle is obviously the biggest club in Cumbria, and they're generally like I think Carlisle have actually been in the first division in the past. Wales does have its own league, it's just not very good. Yes, the Southwest is unfortunately. The Southwest is more cricket and rugby, however, I think you'll find, and that's where you get top flight teams professionally. Wales does have its own league. It's just not very good. Their best teams play in the English league system. It's just for financial reasons. They wouldn't survive otherwise. Um, but no, the Southwest is more cricket and rugby union orientated, which is where most of the talent, athletic talent, goes towards, and to a certain extent, motorsport as well. A fair few racing drivers have come from the Southwest, rally drivers and circuit GT drivers, and of course Jenson Button's from Frome. So there you go. And his dad was a rallycross driver as well. His late father was a rallycross driver. So Jenson Button, there you go. He's from the West Country. But for the most part, rugby union and cricket. Well, it honestly depends because Gretna obviously have reformed and they're not too far from Carlisle. But Berwick Rangers from Northumberland. Um, yes, but Barrow's actually in. Um, no, Barrow, yes, Barrow, but Carlisle's got the better history. I think Carlisle actually also been in the top division at one point. Um, yeah, Carlisle were in the top flight when Man United was struggling in the second tier before Ron Atkinson comes along and wins them an FA Cup in '84. um, there's an English team playing the Scottish system. There's I think 5 or 6. I think there's 4 clubs right now. No, there's 3 clubs right now in the Football League. Wrexham on the verge of coming back to the Football League. I think 2 more clubs in the non-league. So there's about 6 clubs that are Welsh that play that I can think of in the English league system, including the long league system, and then there's the Welsh league system, which is just atrocious. But there is a separate Welsh league. Um, Swindon will never get their Speedway track back and their Speedway team. Speedway is not popular. Speedway used to be really popular, really popular. And Dorchester used to have a Speedway team as well, as did Reading. Um, Speedway's gone downhill in this country. It's very popular in Poland. Ironically, it's one of the national sports in Poland and in Eastern Europe in general. Um, it's more popular on the continent. Speedway in general is less popular now than what it was. Less people watch it now. I've watched it on TV and it's very popular in Eastern Europe, especially in Poland. They put a lot of emphasis on Speedway in Poland. Um, it's again the council's got to give permission for a Speedway track, and then it has to meet safety standards, and then there's got to be the interest in the sport. I think the interest in the sport's gone in the last 10, 15 years. Uh, and there's your problem. I think the interest isn't there anymore. It's it's definitely died a death, and it didn't really have a great media deal. I think the Sky TV era, as I'm going to call it, is Sky Sports era, has definitely killed Speedway. Um, um, so there you go. And only one of those 5 Welsh teams in Wrexham is from North Wales. The rest are all from South Wales. Defunct sports. There's a reason why they're defunct. Not enough people are playing and watching. While they can be really interesting to study the history of and actually look at old footage of, there's a reason why certain sports are no longer played, and it is simply because not enough people were playing and watching. And whether they're amateur and recreational, like real tennis, I think there's only 6 real tennis courts left in existence. That's the reason why real tennis. No one's ever heard of real tennis. Seriously, put real tennis in. And I got tennis. Um, there's a reason why certain sports die out or evolve, and there's a reason why certain sports go defunct or certain leagues go out of business or certain clubs go out of business. It does require enough participation and people watching for it to be worthwhile. Do I watch Speedway? I've seen it. I do watch it occasionally. Normally when I'm around my friends' houses because it's on Free Sports, Premier Sports, and it's on Eurosport as well. And it's very popular in Poland, really popular in Poland for some reason, and in Central Europe, it's very popular. The hotbed of the sport now globally is in Poland and Czech Republic and Slovakia. For some reason, it's just migrated there. Speedway over here has died a death. It really has, for a variety of reasons. And a lot of, yeah, it's weird to say that, but it has sort of died a death. And for whatever reason, be it TV money not good enough, safety, sponsorships, enough riders wanting to ride and compete, prize money not being enough, not enough people watching. Is what it is. My local speedway team, I think, would have been Reading or Thames Valley. I think yeah, Reading had a speedway track at one point. Guildford had a speedway track at one point. I know my uncle's local team was Dorchester. We did have Swindon. I think there was a couple of speedway tracks in London, a couple in the Midlands. Um, dog racing. I've got a few mates who are trainers and breeders and have their dogs. I wouldn't say it's becoming unpopular. It's just been dying a death for a long time. Again, it's not enough people go to the tracks now. So that event attendance, so fee paying public revenues on that are massively down. And that looks really crap for TV when you've got no fans in attendance or limited fans in attendance. The upkeep of stadiums, because they were normally multi-use stadiums with Speedway, and now Speedway's dying and less popular. And Speedway paid a lot for the maintenance of the stadiums. Dog racing as well has gone downhill because Speedway and dog racing used to share facilities, and the facilities got run down. Less people in attendance, and empty stadiums that really shit for TV. And then you've got the animal rights lobby, and dog racing's had a lot of negative headlines with the treatment of the animals and how they're treated and what happens after they retire, and that's come into question over the years. Do I think snooker is growing? Yes, there's more ranking events now. There's more global sport now. There's more international players. It hasn't quite cracked America yet, but it's cracked China, and China's bought into it. It hasn't quite cracked the US. If it cracks the US, it will explode. The Speedway and dog track has been closed for a long time. I don't think it'll come back. People will have found other things. The Speedway was the reason why dog racing has survived as long as it has. And now that there's less Speedway tracks and teams competing and going, Speedway went a long way to maintain the facilities because dog racing just did not bring in the money. And dog racing's been declining for 40, 50 years. Speedway is a more recent decline. It used to be regularly reported in the local papers and on local websites that it's nosedived in recent years. Running costs are a big part of it because you've got fuel costs. Two strokes are becoming unpopular now. The two-stroke manufacturer, apart from 50cc or below, is banned now for the engine. So running costs, manufacturer costs for chassis and engines because you've got to have a specialist engine manufacturer. Noise, limiting the amount of events you can have at a speedway track. Yes, greyhounds. I think whippets as well. Greyhounds and whippets. Any moments you watched in the Grand National? Oh no, I've watched them. I think I've watched every Grand National apart from one since 1994. I've watched every Grand National apart from last year's Grand National. So there you go. And 2020 didn't take place, and 93 didn't take place. So I've watched every Grand National apart from one since 1994. There you go. Red Marauder winning in 2001 was, I think, the one that sticks with me the most because of the weather conditions they raced in, and it was a biblical storm. It was like weather conditions you would get in late November, beginning December, off the Irish Sea in April. There you go. That was one of the wettest Easters we'd had as well. There was a false start in '93. The race there never was. There was a look at the history. It was a false start, and yeah, it, they'd run a full race, so they couldn't obviously the horses couldn't back up 3 days later because you've got to have a gap between races for animal welfare. And yeah, the race it never was. So they've since '93 they've made multiple alterations to the starting procedure. There you go. But yeah, that's the one where the race had a full start and they actually managed to do a full race of the race, and it never was because it was a full start. So they made multiple changes to the starting procedures in the last 29 years. Every year they tinker the starting procedures. They've changed how they get the race started. And in fact, and now they've done that at the Cheltenham Festival as well, and other big races like the King George the Fifth, King George the Sixth, changed to Kempton Park, but every major race, national hunt race, they've changed the starting procedure now. If I had to watch or go before, what? That question makes no sense. Are you talking about like the year Foynaven wins, where like at Valentine's Brook they all pile up, and he's like the only horse to finish, or the year I think it was 1956 that the Queen's horse spectacularly had a phantom jump because he saw the water jump or the chair um, on his left hand side coming down the elbow, and he phantomly jumped it and then didn't finish the race. Because they're the two famous ones from before I was born, and they're in the 50s and the 60s. And Foynaven, the horse that survives the pile up at Valentine's or Beeches Brook or wherever it is, and on the smallest fence on the course, and that's why Foynaven has got the name it has because the horse is the only horse to finish in the pile up. Just makes it round, just pops over as all the other horses are piling up. It was a massive outsider, and just makes it round. There are some sporting events I wish I was a fly on the wall, and I wish I could have a time machine. But in my opinion, you know, do I wish I was at the Champions League final on Saturday? Yeah, a little bit of me does. Do I wish I was at could have gone to the Europa League final last week? Yeah. Tomorrow night, do I wish I was at the Conference League final? Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to have enough money to get some tickets for the Rugby League World Cup, one of the matches at the Emirates this autumn. I was planned to go last year, and obviously it got postponed. Likelihood is I probably don't get tickets because of expense, and there's issues with having enough time off work because it's just so expensive to go to a sports event these days, and with the rise of everything. That's going to be interesting. Actually, is the ticket price for the Rugby League World Cup this autumn. That's going to be a big talking point. It's getting that ticket price right. I've noticed in State of Origin, tickets are going for as little as 43 Australian dollars for game one. 43 Australian dollars, which is the equivalent to I think like 25, 26 quid. 43 Australian dollars. That is not bad. I think it's now about $2 to the pound. It used to be about $3 to the pound, but 43 Australian dollars for a match ticket to State of Origin. That's cheaper than going to a League One game. There you go. In football. Here. What are my thoughts on F1? There's talks about the budget, the cap budget, and the smaller teams not wanting it increased but Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull having a whinge and throwing their toys out the pram because they want the spending cap raise because they haven't factored in the rise in the cost of living. Um, well, basically they've overspent on development. Um, and there were question marks about Red Bull with the amount of parts and development they've done on the car this season. Um, but all the other teams don't want a cap increase because they're saying, well, if that happens, we cannot financially compete because some of us do not have the budget to even meet the spending cap. No, the London Broncos will not fold. They might merge with the London Scholars, but they won't fold. Um, if they do fold, it makes a mockery out of the Super League and the RFL. Um, there are clubs in a worse state than the Broncos, but the Super League is mismanaged. Rugby league is dying in this country. Quite frankly, it's rugby league in this country is badly managed. Look, if the Bradford Bulls are still alive with all the mess that they've made of their finances um, over the last 15 years, then the Broncos will survive. I don't think they're not folding. Um, it's a big thing for the RFL and the Super League structure to have not one but two teams in London. They'll end up if needs come, if push comes to shove, they'll merge with the Scholars and they'll rebrand themselves. I can't see them folding. It'll be too embarrassing for the RFL. I mean, the conservative traditions would be like, well, London, the South of England doesn't. It's not a Southerners sport. They're soft. They don't care. They don't support it. It just feeds into the narrative that the moronic governance of the game has. Even though I think there's someone on the board has said we need to grow the game in the Midlands and the South. They've just put a team in Cornwall, for Christ's sake. This is an organisation that doesn't have a clue what they're doing. If the RFL and the Super League, they fouled up the Toronto Wolfpack. They've resurrected themselves for the new, North American Rugby League. And the Ottawa Races, they fouled that up. They should have gone back to Hemel Hempstead, personally, and remained and renamed and stayed the Stags. They've gone to Cornwall, so Hemel Hempstead now has lost their team. So we'll see. The Welsh Crusaders, because you've got North and South Wales. The North Welsh Crusaders. The only way that the Crusaders will work is if they actually name themselves the Wrexham Crusaders or the Wrexham. They can't use Warriors because we can have that, but the Wrexham Warlocks or something, or the Wrexham Druids or something like that. That's the only way I think it could work, is if they actually attach themselves to Wrexham. However, Wrexham is not a massive place. Let's be honest. It's not a big town city. It's not the biggest urban area, and it's not in a big area apart from Shrewsbury across the border, which and Telford, not that far away, where you have a big catchment area. You know, it's in a very rural area. You take out Telford and Shrewsbury just across the border, and there's not a lot around Wrexham. The villages, there's not many villages in other towns, so they've got a small catchment area for fan base. That's the problem with rugby league in North Wales and South Wales, but then rugby union will try and kill it anyway, because Welsh Rugby Union has a fetish for hampering the growth of rugby league and vice versa. Then there's a reason why both codes have no money. Do I think Tampa Bay can win 3 in a row? Now they've beaten the Panthers, yes, and they've beaten the Maple Leafs, yes. It all depends on who is the conference champion from the West. And Colorado and the Battle of Alberta. The Avalanche and the two Alberta teams, it's not going to be easy. And the Blues are still in there. So Tampa haven't necessarily got it a given. And while the Rangers are beating the Canes right now, the Hurricanes, Carolina, can turn things around against the Rangers. They can score at will. And they so while Tampa in their conference is the experienced team with the playoff experience. Carolina got playoff experience as well. They're not like no hopers. That's the danger with Tampa, is they will underestimate the Rangers should the Rangers beat the Canes. And if the Canes get through that, then it's not, plain sailing for the Lightning. Yes, they've had a sweep, which helps, but while they swept the Panthers, they still had 7 games against a very, very good Maple Leaf side who just, again, for some reason, just collapsed in Game 7. Well, actually, they collapsed in Game 6, but in the Western Conference, whoever comes out the Western Conference is a good side. And if Tampa do make the Stanley Cup final, that's if they do. St. Louis have recently, are the other team before them to win the Stanley Cup. There's still a fair few in that lineup who were part of that Stanley Cup winning team. And if Edmonton make it past Calgary, they've got McDavid and Draisaitl. If Calgary make it, they've just got depth across all 4 forward lines in the defence corps, and Markstrom in goal is just a brick wall. If Colorado get through, they've got goals galore in them, and all 4 of the Western Conference teams are big and physical, which is a Western Conference trait. Is okay, if we can't outscore you, we'll beat the fuck out of you, basically. We'll beat you up, and then we'll outscore you. Tampa have to be wary of that. They played a lot of hockey as well. To do 3 in a row is ridiculous. To do 3 in a row would be a full, nearly a full extra season of hockey on top of an 82-game schedule that they played. So you imagine all those extra games. That's an extra 50, 60, 70 odd games they would have played in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And since 2015, where they made the final as well, they've made 3 Stanley Cup finals since 2015 anyway. That's a lot of extra games on their bodies for those players who've been like Stamkos the entire time and Kucherov. That is a lot of extra games. Some of the players who were there in 2015 and in their 2 Stanley Cup wins have now retired, for example. That is a lot of extra games on the body. And Stamkos didn't really have much to do with the last Stanley Cup win. And there is a chance they could go in too rested, not the momentum stopped. But look, I'm a Jets fan. We swept Edmonton last year and got swept ourselves. So just because you've had a sweep of a team doesn't mean you won't get swept in the next round. It's all about application and attitude. And sometimes a matchup just doesn't work. The Florida Panthers, I thought they would go to 7 games. Curse of President Trophy. It happened to Tampa. They got swept by the Blue Jackets 3-4 years ago. So, while yes, right now they're the first team through to the conference finals, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to win the Stanley Cup. It just means they have that extra bit of rest and recuperation. They've had a 7-game series already, though. The Canes might beat the Rangers or vice versa before 7 games. The Battle of Alberta, St. Louis, Colorado, may not go to 7 games. And the conference finals may not go to 7 games, but they are in a healthy position. Why is it the Maple Leafs keep at this point? It's been that long since they won a playoff series. I think it goes back. I think it's 2003. I think it's 2004. It's pre 2004, 2005 lockout. We have to go that far back. It's been that long. It's been nearly 20 years, I think. And 5 consecutive first-round exits, which is a record for a North American sports league, or any North American sports franchise, excluding NFL because they're only 1-game series and not like a series of games. It's only a one-off game. Even so, still a record of 5 consecutive first-round exits. No one in the NBA, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, the NFL, Major League Rugby hasn't even been going for 5 years. No other major sports league in North America has had 5 consecutive years of a first-round exit. They are now making records that no one wants. that is a long time without a playoff win. I think that's also the longest playoff first round drought as well, because now Florida have broken theirs. Active first round drought in the playoffs. So it's not only is it the longest drought without a playoff series win, because Florida have now broken their drought. It's the longest active. I think it's the second longest in history. It's the If they do it next year, it'd be 6 consecutive seasons, which is another record in itself. The record before theirs was 4. So there is problems. It jointly held that record. They are in serious trouble. Their salary cap is out of shape. Their lineup is out of shape. They have an unbalanced squad roster, should I say? It's too top heavy. There's not enough squad depth in the way the contracts. They haven't got defensemen in their top 5 contracts. They blamed it on the goalie last year, so they trade him. Who are they going to blame it on this year? Because it's going to be a matter of time before, like, Austin Matthews goes, I want to go back to Arizona where I'm from, which could do wonders for that franchise. It's going to be Mitch Marner. Are they going to blame him? Tavares? Who are they going to blame now? Because the fan base is toxic, the media is toxic, and unfortunately, that toxicity around the team has got to be impacting the team now. Kyle Dubas is going to be under a lot of pressure this offseason, because imagine if they fail to make the playoffs next year. That's got to be coach and GM gone if that happens. If they fail to make out the first round next year, that's got to be coach and GM on the chopping block, if not gone. And I can see players not wanting to stay there and leaving as free agents or being traded, because there has to come a point where players are going, I don't want to play here anymore. Something has gone horribly wrong there. I think it's the way the team is set up. It's got to be more than just mental, because that it has to be the structure of the squad. It has to be the structure of the roster being too top heavy with top 2 lines. It has to be, because it's just not working. And the regular season was ridiculous. Okay, their regular season this year was ridiculous. But playoffs, it's a mess. It has to come a point where, I mean, look, Connor McDavid's only got to the second round once before, and has had even less playoff appearances than Austin Matthews. But the Jets have never won the Stanley Cup in their current iteration. The Arizona Coyotes, which are the previous Jets, the former WHA Jets, they won the WHA version of the Stanley Cup. So the previous Jets organisation, which is now the Arizona Coyotes, I think 3 years in a row and 4 out of the 5 years that the WHA was in existence. The closest we've got to is the conference final in 2018. And 2018 was, I think, the year that we blew it. 2018 and 2019 was our window and we've blown it. But I think Barry Trotz is close to being agreed to as our new coach. There's a lot of rumours linking Barry Trotz with the vacant head coach role, because the whole coaching set, Paul Maurice and Lowry and all that have all gone. So I think Barry Trotz will be our new coach come pre-season. But the Jets themselves, the last Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup was the Montreal Canadiens with Patrick Roy in net in '93. It's been 29 years since a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup. Maple Leafs, it was 67. So that drought gets longer and longer, and the longer that drought goes on, and the longer their first round woes continue, the more difficult and the more toxic it becomes. There we go. But no, I am thinking about prepping a video for Zlatan Ibrahimovic. I think I have to, quite honestly. I honestly think I have to with Zlatan, because 11 years apart, he wins titles with AC Milan. That tells you something. And the fact he's still going, he's over the age of 40, is ridiculous. Considering when he was at Man United, he basically retired, and then he goes to LA Galaxy and finds a new lease of life. Zlatan Ibrahimovic is just an enigma, quite frankly. Um, people said he was past it a decade ago, and he's proven them wrong. But Zlatan Ibrahimovic, that's he's just. I've got to look at the career of Zlatan Ibrahimovic because the stats are ridiculous, um, absolutely ridiculous, and the injuries he's had as well. But Zlatan Ibrahimovic, I've definitely got to do a video on Zlatan because the clubs he's played for and the silverware he has won as a player, domestic and European, is just ridiculous. He may not have won anything at international level, but those 4 goals against England in that friendly as well, ridiculous. Possibly scoring one of the greatest goals of all time. Zlatan Ibrahimovic. He's not everyone's cup of tea at various points in his career, but the older he gets, I think the better he gets. And he might even decide to go for another year. He might decide, I want to play another year now. Just imagine if Mourinho can get him to Roma. That would be ridiculous. I can see him doing that actually. United with Mourinho at Roma. I can see that happening. Don't ask me how, but I can. That would be absolutely ridiculous. That would be just off the charts ridiculous. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the enigma that is, because there were times in his career where he didn't look great. He struggled in Europe against English opposition. He famously could not score against English opposition. Goes to Man United and then scores against everyone. When he's won I think he's won a trophy at every club he's been at as well. Something. There is something about Zlatan Ibrahimovic that just defies logic. And considering he went 5-6 years ago when he was at Man United, his knees were destroyed. He was done, and he came out of retirement, goes to LA Galaxy, he retires, and then comes out of retirement, and then does what he does at LA Galaxy and at AC Milan. It's just ridiculous. The guy's immortal. Possibly the greatest centre forward ever to play the game. Possibly the greatest centre forward ever to play the game, in my opinion. He has played for some of the biggest clubs, not just in Europe, but in the world. Absolute ridiculous athlete. And the fact he kept coming back from injury and poor form, he didn't want to give up. The guy he's allowed to be the arrogant enigma that he is. Love him or hate him, you've got to admire him. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, in my opinion, he's the guy. Not for goal score, but the longevity of his career. I think Ronaldo and Messi will not have careers as long as Ibrahimovic. They might have scored more goals, they might have had more assists, but Ibrahimovic, he's something else. Absolutely something else. I think he actually played alongside Messi at Barcelona in Messi's first few seasons. He was there, so that tells you something. And he's still going. And his career's going to be longer than Messi's and longer than Ronaldo's. I have no doubt on that. I think he's been a professional for 22 or 23 years or something. He's on Totti levels of length of career at this point. Totti, another player. I want to do a video on is Francesco Totti because he's again another level of elite. Francesco Totti and Zlatan Ibrahimovic, two very underrated players in my opinion. And Totti playing his entire career at Roma. I think he played 23 seasons at Roma, and he played into his 40s. Absolutely ridiculous. I think they've got to be two of the greatest players of all time, not just the one near 'em. But there we go. I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much, obviously, for all your questions. Really appreciate it. I'll have some more videos for you soon at some point. I've got to I've got to do a video on Ibrahimovic and Totti now, because if Ibrahimovic goes for one more year, I think he will surpass Totti for consecutive seasons played, which is 23. I think he'll pass that. I think Zlatan's probably going to do it as well. Actually, he's not made any inclination that he's going to retire. He hasn't stated that's it. I'm done with AC Milan. I think he might want to go around for another season. That genuinely terrifies me. I don't know what they put in the water in Italy, but Maldini, Costa Curta, Totti. There's something in the water in Italy where they just play into their 40s. You know, Dino Zoff, Fontana at Lazio. He played till he was 44, I think. There are some Italian players who played into their early mid 40s. Inzaghi had a long career. There were two Inzaghis. There was the younger and the older one. One of them good career, one not so good. I might do a career on Del Piero as well, because he was a machine. Pirlo played till he was 37. Yeah, some good players who come out of Italy or spent a lot of their time in Italy in their careers. And I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions. Really appreciate it. We're going to leave it with Zlatan Ibrahimovic winning the title with AC Milan 11 years after he last won the title with AC Milan. So there we go. Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Is that the last time he plays football? Will he go around for another season? We'll have to wait and see with Zlatan, because he's retired before and come out of retirement within a short spell. So Zlatan Ibrahimovic, will he finally retire? I'll leave that question for you guys. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.